My name is Celeste Bishop, and I'm 29 years old. 11 years ago, 3 days before my 18th birthday, my parents canceled my party because my older sister cried that it made her feel less special. I moved out that same night. 2 duffel bags, a coffee tin with $1,300 in it, and a phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me on time. What happened 1 year later at my grandmother's 80th birthday party, in the middle of a flower field I planted with my own hands, is the part of the story my family still won't say out loud. My sister stood in that field, looked at everything I had built, and came apart in front of 30 relatives. The fallout cracked our family straight down the middle, and it has never been put back together. But here's what none of them ever understood. I wasn't the one who shattered us. I just stopped holding the pieces. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where women who were told to stay small finally tell the whole story, calmly, and all the way to the end. If you've ever been the one who was fine on her own, this one is for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because you'll want to be here when we get to that field. To explain the birthday, I have to explain the house. Our family ran like an emergency room. Whoever was bleeding loudest got everything. The money, the attention, both parents at once. And my sister Brianna was always bleeding loudest. I was 7 when I figured out the math. My second grade recital fell on the same night Brianna, then 10, had a stomachache that vanished by 9 o'clock. Nobody came to hear me sing. My mother explained it in the car, patient as a teller counting bills. Your sister needed us. You did wonderful, I'm sure. When I was 12, I saved for white sneakers with my own birthday money, and they became family shoes the week Brianna decided hers pinched. When teachers praised me, Mom repackaged it before it reached the dinner table. Quieter, smaller, something we didn't dwell on. Dwelling was reserved. I want to be fair here, because fairness is the whole point of this story. My parents never hit me. I was fed, clothed, driven to school. But in the Bishop house, fine wasn't a feeling. It was a job assignment. I was hired at 7 and never once got a day off. The one person who saw the arithmetic was my dad. He'd catch my eye across the wreckage of another ruined evening and wince, like a man watching weather he had no plans to come in from. The summer I turned 15, he found me weeding Grandma Ruth's beds and said, out of nowhere, 18 is yours, kiddo. Whatever you want. I promise. I planted that promise deeper than anything I ever put in the ground. That was my mistake, and it took 3 years to sprout into the worst night of my life. You should understand my sister, because the story is not fair to her either, just in a different way. Brianna was 21 that fall, 3 years older than me, and she had already enrolled in and abandoned 2 colleges. Each exit arrived the same way: a midnight phone call, a crisis, my mother mobilizing like the National Guard. Nobody in our house ever used the word failed. Brianna wasn't supported enough. Brianna was more sensitive than other people. Every collapse got renamed until it sounded like a diagnosis, and every diagnosis came with a bill my parents were honored to pay. Here's the thing I understood only years later. They built her that way. From the crib, Brianna was told she was fragile. So fragile is what she became. Needing things was her whole identity, the same way not needing things was mine. We were both cast before we could talk. The clearest picture I can give you is the night of my 4-H banquet, the spring I was 16. I'd won a county ribbon for a raised bed system I designed myself, the first thing I was ever publicly good at. My parents came, which shocked me. Then Brianna called from a parking lot, crying about a boyfriend, and dinner ended before the awards did. I rode home with my ribbon in my lap. In the kitchen, Brianna saw it and her face crumpled like I'd slapped her. Tonight was awful, she said, and you're standing there with a prize. It's supposed to be about me right now. She said it the way you'd cite a rule, because in our house, it was one. My mother made her tea. Nobody asked to see the ribbon. I pinned it inside my closet door, where things that were mine had to live. What saved me was dirt. At 14, I started weekends at Hollis Greenhouse on the edge of town, hauling flats and washing pots for June Hollis, who was 63, built like a fence post, and constitutionally incapable of flattery. June paid me in wages, eye rolls, and free advice, which is to say she paid me more than anyone ever had. By 17, I could run her seed room alone. Every paycheck went into a savings account at First Hartwell Bank. $9,412 by that September. 3 years of Saturdays. One detail matters. I opened that account at 14, and the bank required an adult on it, so it was a joint account with my mother. At 17, I asked to open my own. The teller said I'd need a parent to co-sign until I turned 18. Mom smiled and said, "After your birthday, sweetheart. One thing at a time." Then she said it again in June, and again in August. I noticed. I want that on the record. I noticed. So I started skimming my own harvest, cashing small amounts, 20 here, 40 there, and folding the bills into an empty coffee tin I kept behind my winter boots. By September, the tin held $1,300. I told myself I was being paranoid, that mothers don't need watching like weather. Looking back, I wasn't being paranoid. I was being slow. The rest of the money sat where it sat, because a 17-year-old cannot outrank a co-signature, and because some part of me still believed the account was a shared garden instead of what it actually was, land in someone else's name, worked by me. The party I planned was not a party by most people's standards. Dinner in Grandma Ruth's backyard, string lights in the maple, a sheet cake from Hartwell Bakery, chocolate with cream filling, my name in yellow icing. 15 people, folding chairs, June invited and threatening to come. That was the whole dream. One evening, one table. Everybody's eyes pointed the same direction for once, and the direction was me. Dad had promised, and for 3 years I'd carried that promise around like a seed packet, checking the date. 18 was also a doorway. I'd been accepted into the state agricultural program for the spring term, and past it, blurry but real, was the only future I ever wanted. A cut flower farm with my own name on it. Grandma Ruth was the one who put that shape in my head. She grew dahlias behind her house on Maple Street, a dark crimson strain her family had kept going since the year my dad was born, petals so deep they looked like velvet drinking light. That August, she walked me down her rows, tapped a bloom, and said, "Flowers don't apologize for taking up a bed, Celeste. Notice that." I did. I noticed it the way you notice a door standing open. Then, 3 weeks before my birthday, Brianna announced her third program, a wellness and design semester in Columbus. Very exclusive, very urgent. It needed a deposit right away, she said, or her spot would go to someone whose family believed in them. I remember exactly where I was standing when she said it, because the kitchen went quiet in a way I'd been trained since childhood to read. Quiet, in our house, was the sound of money changing direction. Brianna lasted 11 days in Columbus. 4 days before my birthday, a Friday, she came home at 1 in the morning. I heard the front door, then the particular register of her crying, the one that meant furniture was about to be rearranged around it. By breakfast, the house had a new gravity. Mom moved through the kitchen like a triage nurse, murmuring into her phone. Dad sat with his coffee and studied the table. Brianna held the middle of the couch, wrapped in the good quilt, narrating the unfairness of Columbus to anyone who passed. I made toast and said nothing, which was my job. That evening, I heard Mom in the hallway on the phone with Aunt Patty, my dad's sister. Her voice had its planning tone, low and smooth, the one she used when a story was being fitted for public wear. I caught the phrase, "What's best for the family right now?" and the smaller phrase after it, the one aimed at me without my name attached. Well, she's got her whole life for parties. I stood in my room with a stack of paper invitations I'd hand-lettered myself, because we'd never gotten around to sending them, because something in me had known better than to make it official. 15 envelopes. I'd drawn a little dahlia on each one. I put them in my desk drawer, face down, and told myself the math could still work. That even in our emergency room, a girl only turns 18 once, and surely that outranked a homesickness. The next morning, Saturday, my mother knocked on my door with 2 mugs of cocoa. She had her gift-wrapping voice on, and I knew, before she said a thing, exactly which gift was about to be taken back. She sat on the edge of my bed and arranged her face into kindness. "Sweetheart, about Tuesday." Tuesday, mind you. My birthday had become a day of the week. "Your dad and I have been talking. With everything your sister is going through, a party right now would just rub salt in it. She sees you celebrating with her life upside down. Honey, it would break her." I asked what exactly they wanted to do. "Postpone," Mom said, bright as a coupon. "Just until Brianna's stronger. We'll do something small later. Family only." Later. In the Bishop house, later was where my things went to die. I looked at her and did something I had never done at that kitchen table pitch of my life. I asked the real question. "When was my turn scheduled, Mom? I'd like to see the calendar." Her face flickered, then settled, and she said the sentence that has followed me for 11 years. "Oh, Celeste, don't be dramatic. You've always been fine on your own." There it was. The family constitution, read aloud at last. Being fine was my contribution, the tax I paid so the household could balance. Behind her, my dad appeared in the doorway. And this is the part that stayed sharp longer than any of it. He looked at me, and he knew. 18 is yours, kiddo. I promise." He put one hand on the doorframe, opened his mouth, and then Brianna called from downstairs, wet and urgent, and the doorway was empty. 30 seconds, maybe less. That's how long a 3-year promise takes to fold. Mom squeezed my knee on her way out. "You'll understand when you have a sensitive child," she said. I sat very still after they left, listening to the house arrange itself around my sister 1 floor down. I didn't rage and I didn't beg, and if you've ever been the strong one, you know why. Practice. What I did was open my laptop and check the balance on a savings account. Then, that evening, the bakery called and canceled nothing. The girl from Hartwell Bakery was calling to confirm the changes on order 41. I said I hadn't made changes. She read them to me anyway, cheerful, oblivious, each word landing like gravel. Same cake, new pickup day, Saturday, new inscription. They'd kept my chocolate sheet cake, the one with cream filling that I had chosen in July, and had my name scraped off the ticket. It now read, "Welcome home, Brianna." There was going to be an encouragement dinner the following Saturday night, 4 days after my birthday would have passed uncelebrated. And the guest list, I'd learn later, overlapped mine almost exactly. Same aunts, same cousins, same folding chairs. My party hadn't been postponed. It had been harvested for parts. I thanked the bakery girl because none of it was her fault, and hung up, and stood in my room while something in my chest went very quiet and very level, like a field after the combine passes. People think decisions like mine are made in flames. Mine wasn't. It was made the way frost comes. Clear sky, no wind, everything simply done growing. I took my 2 duffel bags down from the closet shelf. I packed work clothes, boots, the ribbon off the closet door, the 15 envelopes I never sent. I dug the coffee tin out from behind my winter boots and counted it by touch. Then I sat on my bed and made 1 phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me on time and on purpose. June Hollis listened for about 10 seconds. "The loft over the seed room has a bed in it," she said. "It's drafty. Rent's $40 a month and you'll earn it before sunrise. Come or don't." My birthday was still 3 days away. I didn't wait for it. I moved out that same night. Leaving a house you grew up in takes about 4 minutes if you've been packing your whole life without knowing it. I came down the stairs with a duffel on each shoulder. Mom was at the kitchen island with her tea. She looked at the bags, then at me, and chose irritation over alarm. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Celeste, don't be theatrical. Where exactly do you think you're going?" I said I had work in the morning, which was true, and left the rest. Brianna watched from the couch with the quilt pulled to her chin, and for half a second something crossed her face that looked almost like envy. Of the bags, of the door, of a person who got to be the one leaving. Dad followed me onto the porch. He pressed a folded envelope into my hand, $60 increased fives and tens, the cash of a man who'd been quietly emptying his pockets into a drawer for a while. "Call your grandmother Sundays," he said. "She'll worry." He didn't say, "Don't go." We both heard him not say it. I walked the 2 miles to Hollis Greenhouse under a September sky, the color of a bruised plum, and when I let myself into the seed room, the warm smell of soil met me like somebody glad I'd come. The loft was drafty, exactly as promised. I lay on the narrow bed and understood something I'd been circling for years. Being fine was the rent I paid to live in that house. That night, I stopped paying. 3 days later, I turned 18 over a grocery store cupcake with one candle June stuck in it, embarrassed by her own gesture. Then Wednesday morning, I went to the bank to collect my 3 years of Saturdays. And that's when the teller's face changed. I'd come in to open my own account, finally, no cosigner needed, and slide my savings across the desk into it. The teller pulled up the joint account, and her smile did that thing bank smiles do when the screen disagrees with the customer. The balance was $912. $8,500 had been withdrawn 3 weeks earlier, right around the time Brianna's very exclusive Columbus program needed its deposit right away. Every stall made sense at once. "After your birthday, sweetheart. One thing at a time." My mother hadn't been forgetting to co-sign my paperwork. She'd been keeping the gate open until she was done using the field. And here is the part I want every listener to sit with. It was completely legal. A joint account belongs to both names on it. She didn't steal a dime, as far as the law is concerned. She just spent my 3 years of Saturdays on a program my sister quit in 11 days. I called her from the parking lot. She didn't even pause. "Family money goes where the family needs it, Celeste. Your sister's future was on the line. You're young and you're healthy. You'll earn it back in no time." Then, gentler, like a tip left for a waitress. "This is what families do." I went back inside, withdrew the $912, and closed the account with both hands steady. I waited until the truck June had lent me before I let them shake. By Sunday, my mother had already told the family her version of everything: the party, the bags, the bank. I found that out from a voicemail. It seems I was now the villain of a story I hadn't even been allowed to read. The official Bishop family version went like this. Celeste threw a tantrum over a birthday party, abandoned her sister in a mental health crisis, and stormed out to punish everyone. It played at church. It played at the hair salon. It played especially well with Aunt Patty, my dad's sister, who left me the voicemail. "I'm just disappointed, honey. Your mother is heartbroken." "A party, Celeste? Really?" I didn't call back and argue, and I want to explain why, because it wasn't weakness. My mother had been rehearsing the family narrator role for 52 years. Arguing with her in front of her audience was playing an away game against a Hall of Famer. I decided my side of the story would have to grow up out of the ground where nobody could talk over it. The first Sunday of October, a mud-brown sedan crunched into the greenhouse lot, and my grandmother Ruth climbed out of it, 79 years old, cane in one hand and a shoebox under her arm. She looked around the seed room like a woman inspecting a fence line, then set the box on the potting bench. Inside, packed in wood shavings, were dahlia tubers, knobby, ugly, miraculous things, dug from the crimson row behind her house on Maple Street. Her family had kept that strain alive since the year my father was born. "You know what these are," she said. It wasn't a question. "Plant them somewhere they'll get looked at." Then she patted my cheek with a hand like paper and said she was missing her program. I made it all the way to her taillights before I finally came apart, and I want you to notice it took a kindness to do it. Being robbed hadn't managed. Being handed something did. That fall and winter, my life shrank to a rhythm you could set a watch by. Greenhouse from 5:30 to 2, hauling, watering, learning June's seed room like scripture. Then the dinner shift at Rosie's Diner until 10, carrying meatloaf specials to men who tipped in quarters and advice. Back in the loft, I read June's beat-up growing books until the word swam: succession planting, cold hardiness, stem counts per row foot. I filled a spiral notebook with plans and crossed most of them out, which June assured me was the whole job. I also wrote to the state agricultural program and deferred my spot 1 year. I told them it was financial. It was, but it was also this. Somewhere between the bank and the shoebox, my plan had changed shape. Meanwhile, across town, my $8,500 had bought my sister a semester she never finished and a bedroom she never left. Grandma Ruth reported in on Sundays, dry as toast. Your sister's resting, your mother's managing, your father's mowing a lawn that stopped growing in October. Let me pause here, friend, because I know some of you are living this exact winter right now. If you have ever worked a double shift while the person who took from you slept in your old bedroom, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story is starting to feel like your story, take 1 second and subscribe, because the next part is where the ground starts to turn. Thanksgiving was coming, and my mother has never in her life let a holiday go unused. She called the Monday before Thanksgiving, voice warm as a casserole. We want you at the table, sweetheart. This silliness has gone on long enough. We're prepared to put the whole outburst behind us. I asked what putting it behind us involved, because with my mother, forgiveness always came with paperwork. She laid out the terms like she was reading a recipe. I would apologize to Brianna in front of the family for making her setback about me. I would move back into my old room where they could keep an eye on me. I would contribute to the household now that I was so keen on working. And I would let go of this little gardening phase before I embarrassed myself further. I remember looking out the loft window at June's empty back field while she talked. 2 acres of dead grass with frost on it, and feeling the strangest calm. And if I say no? I asked. Her voice cooled a single degree. We worry about your sister, Celeste. She's delicate. You've always been fine. Honestly, it's the one thing we never had to think about. There it was again. The Family Constitution, Article 1. I thanked her for the invitation and told her I had to work Thanksgiving morning. The silence on the line had a shape to it. Then don't bother coming at Christmas either, she said, and hung up first. She always hung up first. I stood with the phone against my ear a while anyway, listening to nothing. Here's what I didn't know that night. It would be almost 10 months before I heard my mother's voice again, and by then, everything about the ground between us would have changed. Christmas Eve, the greenhouse was closed and the loft was so quiet I could hear the propane heater think about quitting. I'm not going to dress this part up because some of you have sat in this exact chair. I wrote my mother a Christmas card. Took me an hour, 4 drafts, the last one down to almost nothing. Merry Christmas, Mom. I'm safe. I'm working. Then I sat with the stamp on my tongue and understood, with a clarity that tasted like glue, that I wasn't writing to my mother. I was writing to a mother I had invented, one who would read it at the sink and soften and drive over with cocoa. That woman didn't live at my parents' address. I put the card in the drawer with my 15 unsent invitations. The collection was growing. Around 8, headlights swept the lot, and Grandma Ruth let herself into the seed room with a tin of molasses cookies and 0 explanation of what she'd told my parents about where she was. We ate them next to the seedling heat mats, and she inspected my spiral notebook like a loan officer, which, looking back, she sort of was. June stumped in near 9 with something wrapped in butcher paper. A spool of striped gross-grain ribbon, heavy, the good kind. For your first market table, she said, daring me to make it emotional. I didn't dare. But when they'd gone, I stood the spool on the windowsill where the invented mother's card would have lived, and it looked exactly like what it was. A bet. 2 old women had just wagered on a girl with $900 and a shoebox. In January, June raised the stakes herself, and what she offered me came with a contract and no mercy. The second week of January, June walked me out to the backfield in boots and a dead man's barn coat and made me the offer that split my life into before and after. 2 acres of fallow ground behind the greenhouses, south-facing, water line already run to the old sheep trough. I don't do charity, she said, before I could say anything at all. 3 seasons, 900 a season, first season up front. You supply your own sweat, your own seed, your own mistakes. Written down proper. Both signatures, so neither of us can get sentimental about it. $900 was nearly everything left from the account, and everything left in the coffee tin after seed catalogs was already spoken for. Trellis netting, silage tarps, a used walk-behind cedar with a wobble. I stood on the frozen ground and did the math 3 times, and the math said no, and something underneath the math said now. I signed at her kitchen table that Friday. 2 acres, $900, and a shoebox. That was my whole inheritance, and it turned out to be enough. The same week, a letter from the state agricultural program sat on my windowsill asking me to confirm my deferred spot. I let the deadline pass on purpose. I want to be honest that it scared me worse than leaving home had. Leaving home, I'd had somewhere to walk to. This time, I was walking off the edge of my own map, 18 years old, no college, no family, no backup plan, on land I didn't own. But you cannot grow anything with 1 foot out of the field. That February, when the ground gave, I buried Grandma Ruth's crimson tubers in trays of damp shavings to wake them. And the first green nubs broke through on the exact morning the county paper would have called foolish. Mine. Spring made me pay for my confidence almost immediately. I'd started ranunculus and sweet peas early, rows of them, and in late April I planted out ahead of the calendar because the 10-day forecast smiled at me, and I wanted a jump on Mother's Day. Then a frost slid down out of Canada on a clear, windless night. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that simply arrives and files its paperwork. I walked the rows at dawn with my breath hanging and $400 of seedlings gone to wet brown rags. I'd known better, is the thing. June's books had told me. June had told me. I'd heard the warning and gambled anyway, because hope is a beautiful liar. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to feel sick about it, sitting on an overturned bucket at the end of the dead row. Then I got the notebook and wrote down the date, the low, and the lesson, because self-pity doesn't compost into anything, but records do. June came out around 7, surveyed the damage with her hands in her pockets, and delivered the eulogy. Frost isn't a verdict, girl. It's tuition. We replanted. I leaned harder on the tough things. Zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, snapdragons under low tunnels, and I babied the dahlias in their trays like a maternity ward, because those weren't just plants. Those were the only heirloom anyone had ever handed me. By the last week of May, the field had gone from graph paper to green, rows straight enough that June grunted at them, which from June was a parade. And by the first Saturday of June, I had a problem I'd never once planned for in the spiral notebook. Buckets and buckets of flowers, cut, conditioned, gorgeous, and not one single place to sell them. Yet. The Hartwell Farmers Market rents you 8 feet of Saturday for $15. I took the space between a honey guy and a woman who sold goat soap, set up a borrowed card table, and dressed it with June's striped ribbon and a chalkboard I'd lettered at midnight. Mixed bouquets, $15. Zinnias like carnival glass, cosmos, snapdragons, blue bachelor's buttons. I'd wrapped 30 bouquets in craft paper and was quietly terrified of coming home with 29. The first customer was a retired teacher who bought 2 and told me nobody had sold real flowers at this market in years. By 10:30, I was restocking from buckets under the table. By noon, I had sold clean out, $340 in a cigar box, most of it in 5s, and my cheeks aching from a shape they weren't used to holding. I'm not going to pretend $340 is wealth. It was less than a week of double shifts, but every bill in that box had been photosynthesized out of ground I'd rented with my own signature, and money like that weighs different. Word moved the way word moves in a town like Hartwell. 2 church ladies from my mother's own congregation stopped, recognized me, and got very busy smelling the sweet peas. And before the market even closed, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. 1 line. A market stall. Congratulations. That was the entire message, And if you've ever had a mother like mine, you heard the tone of it exactly. Congratulations pronounced the way you'd say, "Oh, honey." I read it twice, put the phone in the cash box with the fives, and sold the last 3 bouquets. I never did answer it. The field answered for me, all summer long. In July, a bride named Hannah stopped at my stall, got teary over the snapdragons, and asked if I did weddings. I said yes with the immediate confidence of someone who had never done a wedding. $850 for late August, bridal bouquet, 5 jars per table, arch flowers. I spent 2 weeks reading and 1 sleepless night before, floating stems in every vessel June owned, hauling it all in a cooler I'd rigged from a chest freezer box and bagged ice. And late August is when the dahlias came in. Grandma Ruth's crimson broke open fat as saucers, that impossible velvet red, and I built Hannah's bouquet around 9 of them. At the reception, 3 separate women asked the caterer who did the flowers. The caterer pointed across the room at me. "The Dahlia girl," she said, and it stuck the way only accidental names stick. Hannah's mother booked her anniversary party on the spot. 2 bridesmaids took cards I didn't have yet, so I wrote my number on craft paper in florist's crayon, and June laughed at me the whole drive home. Something had shifted, and I could feel it the way you feel a season change through a window before you open the door. The stall was no longer a stall. It was becoming a thing that needed a name. By Labor Day weekend, it had one. My best friend Maddie Price had been showing up on Saturdays since June, first for gossip, then for pay. She's the one who sanded an old fence board, painted bishop blooms on it in buttermilk white, and screwed it to the market stall before I could vote. Bishop blooms. My name, in paint, in public. I stood there feeling naked about it, which tells you everything about how I was raised. By September, the operation looked like an actual business if you squinted with kindness. 25 porch subscription customers took a wrapped bouquet every Friday. Peak market Saturdays cleared $600. Hannah's wedding photos were making the rounds of every engaged girl in the county. I paid June for season 2 in full, early, in cash, mostly to watch her fight down a smile, and she took it and said the trellis rows were crooked, which in June meant congratulations. Here's what I want you to notice, though, because it matters for what's coming. I still worked the back of the stall. Maddie chatted the customers. I kept my hat brim low and my hands busy. Some habits are load-bearing. Being seen still felt like standing in a doorway I wasn't invited through. Meanwhile, Grandma Ruth's Sunday bulletins kept coming. Brianna had quit an online course in June and gone quiet. My mother had stopped mentioning me at church, which Ruth said was its own kind of mention. The whole town was doing arithmetic my mother couldn't stop. A girl who supposedly stormed off over a party doesn't usually surface a year later with a field, a sign, and a waiting list. And then, the Tuesday after Labor Day, a number I didn't recognize lit my phone. The county paper. And the first thing I told that nice reporter was no. Her name was Dana Whitfield, and she wrote the county paper's farm and table column. Somebody at the market had tipped her. I suspected the goat soap woman, who considered my life a serial drama. Dana wanted a profile. Young grower, heirloom dahlias, the whole thing. And my mouth said, "Oh, no, thank you." Before my brain even sat up, the reflex of a girl trained from birth to hand the microphone down the table. I told June about it that evening, expecting agreement, because June regarded publicity the way she regarded aphids. Instead, she set her coffee down with a click. "Girl, for a year other people have been telling your story at every supper table in this county, and you handed them the pen because keeping your head down felt like good manners." She pushed the mug away. "You hide your face. They'll keep writing your story for you. That reporter's offering you the pen back. Take it." I called Dana back the next morning. She came Thursday with a photographer, walked my rows for 2 hours, and asked questions nobody in my family had ever asked me. Why dahlias? Why flowers at all? What the frost had taught me? What the sign meant? When the photographer looked for a backdrop, I did the bravest thing I'd done since a September night with 2 duffel bags. I didn't hide behind an armload of stems or put Maddie beside me. I stood alone, dead center in the crimson row, in my work apron, dirt on my knuckles, and looked straight into the lens. The story ran the following Thursday, front of the features section. By that Thursday noon, my mother had read it. By that Thursday night, so had every single person she'd ever handed her version to. The headline read, "The 18-year-old behind Bishop Bloom's. There was the field, the sign, the velvet red dahlias, and me, looking at the camera like a person entitled to be in a photograph." Dana had written it clean and warm, the greenhouse job at 14, the leased 2 acres, the frost, the wedding, the heirloom tubers from my grandmother. She never mentioned my parents at all, which read louder in Hartwell than anything she could have printed. The town did the math in one sitting. Women I'd never met joined the subscription list with notes like, "So proud of you, honey." The church ladies who'd once inspected the sweet peas now stopped by the stall to say my grandmother must be so pleased. And my mother's telling of things, tantrum, party, abandonment, folded quietly, the way a lie folds when a photograph walks into the room. She called Friday morning. No hello. "You put our family's business in the newspaper, Celeste." I pointed out that the article never mentioned the family at all. "Exactly," she said, and her voice was shaking in a way I'd never heard. "Everyone's asking your sister what she's doing now, at the pharmacy, at church. Do you understand what that does to her? Of course you don't. You've always been fine. You have no idea what it's like for her." I looked out at 2 acres of proof and said gently, "You're right, Mom. I don't." And then, for the first time in my entire life, I hung up first. Brianna, for her part, said nothing at all. No text, no message through Ruth. From a house where feelings were broadcast at full volume, silence was a new instrument. I should have wondered harder what it was tuning up for, because the next call came from my grandmother, with a demand. Grandma Ruth turned 80 at the end of September, and she called me herself, which she did, roughly never, phones being in her view a fad. "They're planning my birthday," she said. "Patty wants the church hall. Your mother wants the house where she can manage things." A pause, and I could hear her smiling around her own idea. "I told them I've sat in both those rooms for 80 years. I want my party in your field, in the middle of something honest. I already told the whole family. I announced it, so nobody could wiggle." I sat down on a bucket. My field. 30-odd bishops and bishop-adjacent relatives, including 2 parents and 1 sister I had not laid eyes on in a year, standing in the middle of everything I'd built out of the wreckage they'd handed me. "Grandma," I said, "Mom will never come." "She'll come," Ruth said, flat as a griddle. "Skipping my 80th after this year in front of everyone? Your mother would rather chew glass. That's exactly why I did it, sweet pea. It's my birthday. I'm allowed 1 present, I pick myself." She wanted truth in the room. This woman. Wanted it planted where nobody could talk over it. "Now, friend, before we walk into that field together, I want to know something, honestly, down in the comments. Would you have let them come? Because I almost said no." I stood in my rows for an hour after that call, arguing with the Dahlias. If this were you, the canceled party, the empty account, the year of silence, tell me what you'd have done. And if you're new here, subscribe now, because a canceled 18th birthday is about to end at an 80th. 1 week out, my mother called. She had a small favor. 2 weeks after I'd hung up on her, she called back and opened with logistics, as if nothing had happened. How many chairs? Would there be shade? Should Patty bring her lemon bars? Then, casually, the way you'd slip a knife into a picnic basket. "One small thing, sweetheart. Sunday, when people ask about the farm, and they will, it would mean the world if you'd present it as a family project. Because honestly, that's what it is, if you think about it. You learned your work ethic somewhere." I actually laughed. 1 short syllable I couldn't hold in. She pressed on, voice sweetening the way it did when the ask was the whole point of the call. "And we think it would be healing. Dr. Feldman thinks it would be healing, for Brianna to have a role there. Events, parties, that sort of thing. She has such an eye. It doesn't need to be formal Sunday. Just, if it comes up, you could mention Brianna handles events for Bishop Bloom's. She needs a win, Celeste. You have so many now. There it was. The emergency room billing department, open for business. My party, my savings. And now the ask had simply scaled up with the harvest. My name, my field, my year of frost and double shifts. Reissued as a family project, with my sister installed in the story like a transplant the body was supposed to accept. No, Mom, I said, calm as I could make it, which by then was very calm. The farm isn't an apology, and it isn't a prop. But you're all welcome Sunday as guests. I'd genuinely like you to come. The silence went on one beat too long. Fine, she said lightly, and I thought I'd closed the door on the ambush. Looking back, I had only closed the front one. The party fell on the last Sunday of September. 1 year, almost to the week, since I'd carried 2 duffel bags down my parents' stairs. Saturday we set up. Maddie and June hauled the long tables into the center aisle between the dahlia rows, and I strung lights through the fence posts and the young maple by the gate. String lights, the exact kind I'd once planned for a backyard on Maple Street. And yes, I noticed. And yes, I hung them anyway. We cut 200 stems of Ruth's crimson and stood them in zinc buckets down the tables. The field was at its absolute peak, that late September flush when dahlias burn brightest right before frost, as if they know. Mid-afternoon, a familiar truck eased up the lane. My father, alone, with 40 folding chairs from the church hall. We hadn't stood face to face in a year. He got out, looked down the rows for a long moment and said, "Ground drain's good here." That's a love letter, in my father's dialect. We set up chairs together for an hour, mostly quiet. Twice he stopped, straightened, half turned to me with his mouth already open, and both times folded whatever it was back up and put it away like the $60 in fives. At the gate, leaving, he tried again and got as far as, "Your grandmother's real proud." Then he drove off toward the house where my mother was, no doubt, ironing the outfits and the story both. Maddie found me watching the taillights. "Ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "No," I said. "Set out the coffee urn anyway." The next afternoon, 31 members of my family walked into my field. Every single one of them came, even her. Especially her. They came up the lane in a caravan of sensible sedans, and I watched 31 people meet my field for the first time. You could see it land on each face at the gate. The aunts going quiet mid-sentence, the cousins lifting their phones, Uncle Ray actually taking off his cap. Late September had dressed the place better than I ever could. 200 crimson dahlias down the long tables, the light going gold, the rose burning red out to the fence line. Grandma Ruth arrived like a head of state, took one slow lap of the center aisle on Patty's arm, and installed herself at the head table where she could supervise both the cake and the truth. My mother stepped out of the car in her navy church dress, and I'll give her this. She never once looked surprised. She toured the tables like a hostess, straightening a jar here, angling a bucket there, telling Aunt Carol, "Oh, we always knew Celeste had the gift. She gets it from my side. I grew things before the girls came along." Smooth as fondant, a year of tantrum and abandonment, repaved in one afternoon into we always knew. I let it go by. The field didn't need me to argue for it. Brianna came last, 40 minutes late, in a dress too formal for folding chairs, hair done like armor. She hugged Grandma Ruth for the photo, took a glass of lemonade she didn't drink, and then drifted the perimeter alone, reading my life like an audit. I watched her stop at the gate where Maddie's fence board sign hung, Bishop Bloom's, buttermilk white, and stand in front of it, very still, for longer than anyone stands in front of a sign. Patty appeared at my elbow with lemon bars and a look. "You okay?" she asked. And it was the first question she'd asked me in a year that wasn't an accusation. "Ask me at sundown," I said. Just before the toasts, I went to cut a few last stems for the cake table and found my mother standing alone at the far end of the crimson row, where the party noise thinned out to bees. She didn't hear me coming. She was touching one of the big saucer blooms with 2 fingers. Barely, the way you'd touch a sleeping baby or a stove you suspect is hot, and her face had gone somewhere I'd never once been invited. "We had rows like this," she said, not really to me. "Behind the house on Delancey Street. I started a whole flat of seeds the spring I was 19. Zinnias, asters. I had a notebook." I stood still, the way you do when a wild thing hasn't spotted you yet. Then your grandma Ellen got sick, and it was 2 years, start to finish, and I was the one. Denny couldn't handle hospitals, so it was me, every day, before work, and after. Her fingers left the pedal. He got the truck when she passed, you know. Everyone said he'd been through so much. My flat of seeds dried up on the windowsill. Nobody watered it. Everybody was busy telling Denny how strong he was going to have to be. For the length of one breath, standing in the row my hands had made, I saw her whole. A girl with a notebook, milled through the same machine, 30 years before me. My throat undid itself. I almost said, "Mom, I know. That's the closest we ever came, and I mean in my entire life." Then she felt me there, and her spine reassembled, and the visitor left her face like a light switched off in a farmhouse window. "That's life, Celeste," she said briskly, already turning toward the tables. "The strong ones carry it. That's what love is." She walked back to the party. I stood in the row and let the bees have the silence, and then the spoon began to ring against the glass. Grandma Ruth stood without help, which she wanted noted, and raised her lemonade to the field. 80 years, she said, and I've had my birthdays in kitchens, church halls, and one memorable year, a hospital. This is the first one I ever had in the middle of something honest. She turned to the buckets of crimson on the tables. My mother grew this dahlia. I grew it the year Tommy was born, and every year after. And last fall, I gave the tubers to my granddaughter, because a flower like this needs hands that show up in frost, and I know showing up hands when I see them. She looked straight at me, and her chin was trembling, and her voice was not. It never had a proper name, that flower. So today I'm naming it, in front of witnesses, so it sticks. Ruth's Crimson, grown by Celeste Bishop, on Celeste Bishop's farm. This field is the most honest thing this family has grown in 30 years. The applause came warm and real, and 31 faces turned toward me, and for once in my life I stood in the light and did not check the exits. And that is the exact moment my mother rose from her chair, glass high, smile wide, and rode the applause like a woman catching a departing train. "And one more piece of happy news, everyone, while we're all together." Her voice carried to the fence posts. "You've all read about our Celeste in the paper. Well, Bishop Blooms is becoming a true family business. Brianna, honey, stand up. Brianna's going to be running all the events and parties here at the farm, both our girls together. We are just so proud of our girls." The clapping started up again, uncertain, the way crowds clap when something feels off but nobody wants to be the first to notice. Down the table, Aunt Patty's eyes found mine and asked the question. And beside my mother, my sister was rising slowly to her feet, glass in hand, and the glass was already shaking. I didn't raise my voice. I've thought about it many times since, and I'm certain of that, because a lifetime of practice holds even when your ears are ringing. I looked at my mother across the long table, 31 relatives between us, and said, "That's not true, Mom. And it's not going to be." Simple as a frost report. The uncertain clapping died. My mother's smile held its position, but something behind it began working hard, and she opened her mouth to smooth it. She was always fastest in open country, and she never got there. Because Brianna's glass hit the table, and my sister made a sound I'd never heard from her, a laugh with the bottom torn out of it. "Of course it's not true," she said, too loud, and then louder. "Nothing about us is true. You want to clap for the girls? You want to hear about the girls?" Her voice climbed into a register that silenced bees. It was supposed to be me. Everything was supposed to be me. That was the deal. That was the whole deal. She swung toward the relatives like a lawn sprinkler. You think she built this alone? You know they canceled her 18th birthday because I cried? Canceled the party, kept the cake, changed the name on it. My name. I ate that cake. She was crying now, mascara going, 22 years of curated fragility burning off like fog. And the money. Oh, you should know about the money. They took her savings, $8,500. Her money, her paychecks, and they poured it into me, into Columbus. And I flushed it in 11 days like I flush everything. My mother was on her feet saying her name in that emergency room voice. Brianna, sweetheart, you're not well. And Brianna wheeled on her, arm flung wide, and her hand caught the zinc bucket at the head table. It went over slow, the way disasters do. Water sheeted across the linen. 24 stems of Ruth's crimson spilled and rolled onto the September grass, red on green, in front of the entire family. And in the ocean of that silence, Aunt Patty stood up, white to the lips, looked at my mother, and said, You told us she left over a party. What I remember best about the next minute is the quiet, a whole field of people not moving. June by the coffee urn with her arms crossed, watching my mother the way she'd watch a hawk over a henhouse. Brianna sobbing into her hands, done, emptied, smaller than I'd ever seen her. And my mother, kneeling on the grass in her navy dress, gathering fallen dahlias into her arms one by one because her hands needed a task while her empire did its arithmetic. Then she looked up at me, and she said it low, just for us, while the whole field held its breath behind me. Fix this. Her eyes were wet and absolutely steady. You can fix this, Celeste. Tell them the party was a misunderstanding. Tell them we helped you start this place. We're your parents. It's barely even a lie. Give your sister the events job. That's all. That's all. And this goes back together. And you come home. Sunday dinners. Your room. Your family. You can finally come home, sweetheart. And here is the part I need you to understand. I wanted it. 11 years later, I can say that plainly. Every cell in me that was ever 7 years old wanted it, because it was the thing itself, the actual prize, held out in the open air at last. My mother, asking me to come home. All I had to do was pay for it. Same currency as always. Shrink the truth. Hand over the story. Share the name on the sign. Disappear at my own table one more time. I looked at her arms full of my grandmother's flowers. I heard the field behind me, full of people finally seeing. You're right, Mom, I said, and my voice came out level as a floor. I've always been fine on my own. You made sure I got the practice. Her arms tightened around the stems. But I'm not buying my seat back. Not with the truth. Not with the farm. Not with me. You're welcome at my table as guests, both of you, any Sunday you want. That's the whole offer. It doesn't go on sale. My mother stood up slowly, still holding the dahlias. And for a second I thought, even then, I thought. Then she laid them on the table like evidence, took Brianna by the hand, and walked out of my field without looking back. She never has. The party didn't end so much as exhale. Ruth announced, to no one in particular, that it was the best birthday she'd had in 80 years, and she'd thank people not to argue, and somehow that gave everyone permission to stay another hour. Patty cut the cake with shaking hands and kept looking at me like a woman rereading a letter she'd filed wrong. But my father stood at the gate a long time after my mother's car had gone. He'd ridden over with Uncle Ray, I realized later, on purpose. When I brought him his jacket, he turned his cap around in his hands like a wheel he was steering. I should have said something at your birthday, he said to the gravel. I've been saying nothing for 20 years, Celeste. Turns out it's the loudest thing I ever did. I told him I knew. Not it's okay. I was done saying that one. Just, I know, Dad. He nodded and got in Ray's truck and went home to the house he'd chosen every day of my life because he was who he was. But that November, letters started coming, one a month, his handwriting like barbed wire, 4 lines at a time. Saw dahlias on a calendar at the feed store. Thought of you. Ground froze early this year. Dad. I kept everyone. When the last taillights left, June and Maddie stacked chairs and Ruth sat sentry over the cake plate. And I walked out alone to the far end of the crimson row with the evening coming down blue and cold. One stem lay snapped where the bucket had gone over. I picked it up and stood there in the dark field that was mine, and understood the last thing, the one I'd been circling all year without landing. I had stopped paying rent a year ago, but I'd kept waiting for the landlord to drive by and see the garden and want me back. That was over now. It had walked out of the field on its own 2 feet. Ruth's voice carried down the rows behind me, ordering Maddie to put the broken stem in water. "Cut flowers aren't dead flowers," she called. "Somebody bring that in the house." Here's where it all settled, in the plain math of afterward. The family did crack, exactly the way the town still tells it. Patty came to the farm the next weekend with lemon bars and an apology she'd written out longhand so she wouldn't botch it, and read it to me at the potting bench. And we both pretended June wasn't listening from the seed room. Sunday dinners moved to Grandma Ruth's little kitchen on Maple Street. Ruth, Patty, Maddie half the time, me smelling of eucalyptus and cooler water. Nobody at that table has ever once asked me to be smaller. My mother tried a new version for a while. Brianna was overtired. Celeste is going through a phase. You know how girls are. But a story needs listeners. And hers kept moving their subscriptions to the other side of the aisle, in some cases, literally. She still lives 2 miles up the road. We have not spoken since she walked out of the field, and I've made my peace with the strong possibility that we never will, because peace was on offer only at a price I don't pay anymore. My father writes his 4 lines a month and slips a 20 in at Christmas like contraband, and loves me the way a man loves from inside a fence he built himself. I've stopped grading it. It's what he has. And Brianna, one night that winter, past midnight, my phone lit up with the first words my sister had sent me in over a year. The flowers were beautiful. That's all. No apology, no follow-up, and when I saw her across the pharmacy in March, she looked at her shoes. I heard she moved in with a friend in Columbus, got a job at a garden center, of all places on this round earth. I never answered the text. I never deleted it either. Some seeds you just leave in the packet and see how you feel come spring. The farm went on being a farm, which is the quiet miracle of farms. Season 3 sold out its subscriptions by April. Ruth's Crimson went in the ground in May, 300 tubers strong, everyone descended from a shoebox. And in June, a girl named Sadie started showing up. 14, 4-H, all elbows and silence, the kind of kid who wins ribbons nobody drives to see. Her mother needed her to be no trouble, and Sadie was aiming to oblige, and I recognized the species on site. I pay her actual wages. I make her invoice me, out loud, looking me in the eye, and the first time she managed it without apologizing, I gave her a raise on the spot. Last week, I caught her bossing a customer's kid away from the seedling trays, hands on hips, taking up her whole entire patch of the doorway, and I had to go stand in the cooler for a minute. That's the crop I'm proudest of, if you're asking. Not the flowers. The girl learning, 3 years earlier than I did, that she's allowed to send a bill for what she gives, and that anybody who only loves her invisible isn't family. They're just a landlord with your childhood photos on their walls. If there's one thing I'd carve on a fence board and nail up where every fine on her own girl could read it, it's this. Love you have to earn by disappearing isn't love. It's rent. And the day you stop paying, you finally find out who was family and who was just collecting. That's my story. A canceled cake, a shoebox of dahlia tubers, 2 acres and 1 signature. If you've been the strong one at your family's table, I hope you plant something of your own this year. And stand where it can be seen. Tell me in the comments what you'd have said in that field, and if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. Next week, another woman tells the whole truth, calmly, to the end.